It is springtime. We're in May and we are just about to get going into our event season. Now, if you're in southern Utah, down in Washington County area, you've already been going for a while. It's one of those things that each year we start doing our town day celebration, our county fairs, all of those things, along with other events that we have. And for those, we're going to use bleachers. We're going to use grandstands. We'll use different types of seating to accommodate visitors to our events or sometimes events that other organizations are hosting, but they're using our facilities. Well, bleachers and grandstands are really an essential part of being able to pull off good events, and they're nice pieces of equipment to help us provide people a good time at our event. However, they can cause serious injuries. They can even cause catastrophes if we don't handle them appropriately, if we don't inspect them, if we don't make sure that they meet the appropriate codes and we don't overload them, and et cetera, on down the line. And over the years, the trust has experienced some very large losses from injuries and damage that have occurred in association with bleachers and grandstands. And so it behooves each of us to ensure that those bleachers are safe, that they're in a condition that's not going to injure somebody or cause property damage. And that's really what this training is about today, is doing those things to ensure those bleachers and grandstands are in good condition. All right, well, let's dive in, maybe talk a little bit more about what those injuries are and the damage. Every year, it's nearly 20,000 people are injured bad enough to go to the emergency department to receive treatment. I found another stat that showed about 15,000 injuries to kids under 18 years of age. So the vast majority of the injuries that happen around bleachers and grandstands involve young people. Now, that's interesting because I look through the losses that we've seen at the trust. It's actually hasn't been young people. They've been older people that have had injuries around bleachers and grandstands. One of the major injuries that happen are falls, and falls, as we know, are injuries that can be significant, that can be life-threatening. And then there are those black swan events that are out there when you have a collapse of a scaffold or a grandstand structure, bleachers, that could cause death and serious injuries to a lot of people. And if you look back through history, there have been some really ugly things that have happened at events like this. And you just imagine the mayhem that would happen if we had a collapse, and what would happen if people were injured. It's pretty frightening thing, and so that's why we want to do things right. Well, I've been using the terms bleachers and grandstands through this, and and there's a standard that we go by, and so I went with that standard for the definition. Here is the definition of what bleachers are: tiered seating supported on a dedicated structural system and two or more rows high. Okay, that is a bleacher. Well, when you read in the standard what it says for grandstands, it's the exact same definition. So these two words are really interchangeable. But generally, when I think of these things, I think of bleachers of being like in the picture. These are the things that we go out to the baseball diamond or soccer fields. Bleachers are like that, and as they get bigger, we may call those grandstands. But for purposes of this presentation and the standards that we'll talk about, they're the same thing. Okay. All right. These bleachers can either be portable or fixed. Some are designed to be moved from place to place. Some are fixed and they haven't moved in some of our facilities out there. They haven't moved for 100 years. We have some significantly older grandstands and bleachers around. We have some that are brand new, and they all have potential to cause injury. They can be indoor or outdoor. The standards vary a little bit based on that. They could be folding or telescopic. You think back to your school days, and you may have had telescopic or folding bleachers that would come out from the wall in the gymnasium to provide that seating, but we didn't have to have those up all the time. And there are specific requirements for that as well. In Utah, we have even created some massive temporary grandstands or bleachers for events. I worked for the Salt Lake Organizing Committee for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games, and we created some massive grandstands. Particularly for the outdoor venues at our ski resorts. Well, these were temporary. We built them for a short period of time, really 17 days in February, that we had events on, and then we tore them down and they moved on to the next show. And I've got a lot of stories about dealing with grandstands and dealing with people. I wish I had better pictures than that, but that was the technology at the time. Digital cameras were not quite as good at that point. But I worked on all of these. You can see in that upper right hand, we stacked basically trailers. These were the commentator cabins. We stacked them on top of each other, on top of the grandstands, and welded everything in place. And we must have done an okay job because we got away without any major issues involving those, but only because we worked hard for that. Bleachers can be made out of a lot of different materials: wood, metal, aluminum, steel. Sometimes they are poured in place concrete. I've seen some bleachers. They're a little more like an amphitheater, but they were just carved out of the side of a mountain, and and they all fit into the same definition of bleachers. Okay. I already alluded to this and said it right out. Right out. We have standards about how bleachers are supposed to be constructed, how they're supposed to be maintained, and all of the ins and outs around those. Here are the standards that we talk about. This is the major one that really applies, and that's the ICC, the International Code Council 300, and it's the 2023 standard. So there's a fairly recent update to that. It is an ANSI standard. These are standards that are a consensus among people in the industry. In many cases, consensus standards are not a standard that is legal, that has, legal enforcement power. But in the event that we have a problem around these will be the standards that we will be judged against in a court of law, in whatever negotiations after a claim has occurred. That ANSI standard or ICC standard could be really critical. So it's important that we know what it is. With this particular standard, it has been incorporated into the International Building Code. And so if you're dealing with bleachers and grandstands, it's part of the building code. And so we're going to have to legally comply with this as well. There's another standard that's out there that is, and there's another ANSI standard. I want to make sure I hit that one first. It's the International Property Maintenance Code. So if we have to do any repairs because of damage or any maintenance to these things, it's going to fall under those requirements as well. There is another standard, and that's the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, developed a standard, and it's older. It's over 20, well, it's just about 20 years old, and it is a guideline. It's older. It is designed to prevent falls, and it is based around retrofitting existing bleachers that are in place to ensure that we prevent falls. And what it says in essence is that guardrails, guards, or handrails are required above 30 inches in height. If that bleacher has seating that is above 30 inches, we're in. And we have to, as we're doing retrofits, we have to bring that in. But that's not the major standard. That's just one that we have as an additional guideline. We also have the National Fire Protection Association 102 in section 666, folding and telescopic seating. That's an important section there if you do happen to have these bleachers that will fold or that are telescopic that can reach out. Now, in most cases, those are internal inside. They're indoors, but we do have some telescopic seating that may be portable that we can pull from one venue to another, and that would require us to be under the NFPA code there, and it says that this type of bleacher needs to be um, inspected by a qualified person each time they are opened. Wow. So that's a pretty significant requirement in that standard. We're not going to hit that one specifically much. We're going to talk about the ICC standard mostly. And so I wanted to hit just a couple of those now because this is really what we're judged against. And if we have an accident, we have a problem at our bleachers or grandstands, we're going to be dealing with these standards. All right. So when do the standards apply? For new construction, absolutely these standards apply. And in the standard, it has sections on new construction, what the requirements are, and also on things that are existing, on bleachers that are existing and in place. Sorry, sneak a quick drink there. Got a little tickle coming on. There is a section on alteration. If I am modifying an older set of bleachers and doing anything significant besides maybe just replacing a damaged component, a seat board or something like that, if I'm altering those things, the standard applies and I need to bring it up to code. And I'm going to say this a couple of times in here. For many of you, and I may say most of you out there, you have a code official that may be part of your organization, or you have some um, interaction with that code official in one way or another. They may work for your organization. You may borrow them from the county or from another organization. They are critical in helping you get your bleachers and grandstands up to code. And they should know this. If they don't, this is something we may want to help them to be able to get that information. I talked about the standard, and I was going to do this when we were talking specifically. This is an ANSI standard. ANSI charges for all of their standards. It is copyright protected material, and I can't just send it out to everybody. Otherwise, I would be in copyright violation. I can help you if you have questions, and we will share certain sections of the standard in here within reason. But this is probably the cheapest ANSI standard that I've ever come across. It's $30. And so you can go online and you pay your $30 and you can download the standard and then you have that. Every code official that has this type of structure in their jurisdiction should have a copy of that code. All right. So what do the standards require? We're going to dive in and talk about some of the major requirements, but we're probably doing more of a 10,000 foot look. There are a few things where we're gonna zoom in a little bit closer, but in general, we're going to give the overall requirement and and then the details should be worked out between you and your code official to ensure that we've met all of those. Just because of the differences from one place to another, I can't really address all of those in a webinar in the time that we have here. All right. So, what standards apply? Construction. Your materials need to be durable. They need to be weather resistant. If they're outside in St. George and it's 120 degrees, they need to be able to withstand that. If they're outdoors and you're in Vernal or Cache County and it gets to 40 below zero, they need to be able to withstand the weather conditions there, snow, and all of the ice and changes freeze thaw cycles that could cause problems with any piece of equipment that's outdoors. It needs to be able to withstand that. They need to be corrosion resistant. If you have a pool, particularly indoor pools, and maybe you have a viewing area where people can watch, swimming races and things like that take place. Those bleachers need to be corrosion resistant because we know we're going to have excess chlorine in that facility just from the chlorine in the water. Okay, these bleachers can be made of combustible materials if they meet the other requirements of the code. So they can be made out of wood. Um, they need to be on a sturdy foundation. And like I said, each of these different types of bleachers are unique. Some are designed so that they can be freestanding. Some of them are designed to be placed on a solid foundation with footings and foundation, and they need to be anchored to that. Um, However these things are designed, they need to have a solid base. I've seen some of these. You think about your soccer field bleachers, and they may have two or three or four different levels of seating. I've seen some of those that are really poorly designed and without ballast. If you were alone and you stepped up to that top layer or that top tier and sat down, that bleacher is going to tip over. Well, in those cases, we need to provide ballast. Whatever we need to do, we need to meet the manufacturer's requirements, and there should be an owner's manual for each one of these things. And I know some of you out there right now are rolling your eyes and saying, "Yeah, our bleachers are 100 years old." It was just folks from the community went out there, and the local welder welded up the frames, and then a bunch of people from the community went out and bolted some seats on it, and that's what we've got. Well, in those cases, we've got to maybe bring in some resources to figure out what is appropriate for that. Can this structure hold the loads that we are looking at putting on that? We need to consider the location where we're putting these bleachers. I've seen some kind of scary situations where we put bleachers on an uneven ground or put them up close to where we had a drop off. Think about that area. Think about the soil type that's there. Is this soil something that's do we have it adequately compacted, or could it sink? Is the slope adequate for these things? Some bleachers can be designed to be installed on a slope, but that's up to the manufacturer. Is there water? Do I run into problems in the springtime when we have runoff or we get summer rains? Are we going to end up with problems with too much water? These need to be at least 10 feet away from the building, except for a few situations where we could have those closer. But in general, we want to keep them away from other structures. They need to be anchored or ballasted. And in the standard, it says outdoor seating shall be anchored or have ballast that is positively attached to resist uplift and horizontal sliding forces in accordance with the building code and the manufacturer's installation requirements. Okay, those two critical things. Code's important, but the manufacturer is important as well. Okay, let's move on. What can we do under the bleachers? What is acceptable to put there? And under the code, it says nothing. Nothing under the bleachers unless it is approved by the fire code official. Especially, we don't want to have things like a cook shack. We don't want to have our concession stand under the bleachers, because if something went wrong, maybe we had a fire in the cook shack, and now we've got a fire that is impacting those bleachers. That's a real problem. So don't be doing anything, and in reality, we should restrict access to anybody besides our people that are inspecting and maintaining those, so people can't go under those bleachers. Okay. Um, Occupant load. Um, this is an important thing. We don't want to put too many people on. This picture that we see here was and a collapse that happened, and it's working, I think it was in the 30s. But a collapse of bleachers, and you can see people are in the in the process of just about to be crushed as these bleachers come down. There's some real potential there when we start putting crowds in our bleachers, and particularly in here we talk about live loads. There's a difference between a static load and a live load where people are moving, or where that force is a moving force. Everybody starts stomping because of, or jumping up and down because of the event, makes them excited. Well, that live load can be significantly more than just the static load that we're dealing with. So live load of 100 pounds per square foot is the basic requirement there. For press boxes, it's 50 pounds per square foot. And then we look, there are some other guidelines that we look at. One person per 18 inches of length of bench. So for every 18 inches, that's one bottom that can sit there. Okay. Funny Olympic story on that. In our grandstands at the Olympic venues, they cheated just a little bit. Now it was within code, but they said, hey, we can put these little extenders on that were 9 inches long on each end of every row of seating. And those were half cheeks. And so if you put those two half cheeks together, you could sell one more ticket, and that was worth a lot of money, and it was worth having. Well, 18 inches per linear foot, or excuse me, per 18 inches linear of your bleachers, you can put one bottom in there, and not more than that. All right. We look at square feet on reviewing stands, maybe areas where we have people standing, or if we've got chairs, we go to 7 feet, 5 feet in for reviewing stands. If we want to know what's the difference between those and regular bleachers, let's talk to our code official about that. All right. And I'll just say, Mike, if we have any questions, feel free to jump in anytime. I know we may have some as we go through today.
Look,
Um,
okay, so far, Jason, good job.
Okay. All right. This is a this is a chart here where we talk about the load capacities that are required. This comes out of the standard. This is important. Talks about our handrails and guards, how much weight they need to be able to support as well, and the direction that weight needs to be able to support that. Okay. All right. So egress obviously is an important consideration when it comes to bleachers, and particularly grandstands. What happens if we have some emergency happen? It could be something like a fire. It could be a disturbance. Somebody gets out of control. And people got to get out of there quickly. It could even be a hailstorm or a weather event, something like that. People got to be able to get out of there. Well, how can they safely egress that? Once again, follow the code, and a lot of this mirrors the building code. It's based on the occupancy. How wide do our egress paths need to be? Well, it's based on the occupancy, but the minimum is 36 inches. Talk with your code official about this. Um, and really, I would say perform a code review before you purchase any new bleachers. What are we going to be required to do? Are we going to have to put fire protection on these bleachers? Which there are situations where we may have to do that. Prior to purchasing these, sit down with your code official and go through the standard and say, all right, when we purchase this, what do we have to meet? What do we have to do? Okay. Here's another chart, minimum number of exits. So up to 250 people, well, there's one required means of egress, but when we throw in the ADA, it basically means we need to have two accessible routes of egress. So once I get up to requiring two, they need to be accessible. That means they need to meet the ADA standards as far as slope for ramps, and width requirements, landings, all of the things that go along with the ADA are applicable. And I'm not going to give you all of the minute detail on that because that's really something we need to work out with our code official. Here's the ADA standard. It requires newly constructed facilities to be accessible to people with disabilities so they, their families, and friends can enjoy equal access to entertainment, recreation, and leisure. Older facilities have to be brought into compliance when they are significantly altered. Same thing that we do with our buildings. But if we look here, how many accessible seats or wheelchair accessible seats do I need? Well, up to 500 seats, I got to have five, along with companion seats for family members or companions that go along with the person that is seated in the wheelchair. And then we go up based on the number of people, the occupancy potential that's there. And just remember, it's not just that we have wheelchair seating, but everything else that goes along with it. Is there an accessible route to get them there? Okay. Now, here's where we look at our many of our grandstands around the state and bleachers are not compliant. We have some issues with these based on spaces that could allow somebody to slip and fall. And maybe they just drop a leg down and they get a laceration off of that piece of metal that's there, or maybe they fall right through. Years ago, we brought on a new member of the trust and went out to do an inspection and audit of their facilities to give them a risk assessment and say, here's some things that you need to work on. Well, we walked out on a grandstand, and this was a big grandstand. It probably held, I would expect 2,000 or 3,000 people. It was about 30 feet high at its uppermost tiers. And you can see in this picture where there's that footboard. You can see my toe. Didn't polish my shoes that day. You can see that footboard. Well, in this grandstand, they had one 2x6 board, just made out of wood, and it had big wide spacings between where it was anchored. And I was literally scared for my life walking out over this. I thought, if I jump on this thing, this board will break and I'm going to drop 30 feet. And so as we're walking through this area with the person that was taking us on the tour, I just had to stop and I said, I am really concerned about this, that kids could just drop straight down through here, because I was in fear of my own life, and I'm a fairly big guy. A small child could have easily fallen between those gaps. And the person that was taking us on the tour said, yeah, we've had a couple. I'm like, what? Yeah, we've had a couple of kids fall through. And when we got through walking through this, a companion of mine that was there with me, we looked at each other and we said, this has got to, we can't do this. This either has to be completely rebuilt, or it just needs to go away because the risk is too high. And very rarely do I just say it's got to go. We normally try to help out and say, here's some things that you can do to bring it into compliance to make it safe. But in this one, it was just, this has got to go. And to the credit of this organization, they went out with an excavator and they knocked the grandstands down and eliminated the hazard there. And sometimes we've got to be willing to do that hard thing. Well, here's the requirement when it comes to open spaces at floorboards and seat boards. So floorboards are what we're looking at there, and then you've got the seat board that you sit on, and so there are spaces under that, or there can be spaces under that. What is the standard? Well, if it's at least 30 inches high, those spaces should not be large enough to allow a 4-inch sphere to pass through. Imagine a ball, right? A 4-inch diameter ball. if I can slide that through that opening, it's not compliant with the standard and has the potential to allow really a child to fall through. Well, that's a pretty major impact to a lot of our bleachers and grandstands around the state, and it's something we really need to work on. All right. Um, there's an exception where the seating is 30 inches above ground, but the uppermost seat is less than 55 inches to the ground, then this requirement doesn't apply. So what does that mean? If I basically have three tiers, measure it, but if I have three tiers of seats, then I'm not going to have to meet this requirement. Of course, if you're buying new, you definitely want to meet that. But if I've got some in place that are out there and I've got those three tiers of seats, I'm okay with that because the potential hazard is not as great as if it's higher than that. And that's what the standard tells us. There should be less than a quarter-inch gap between the floorboards and the seat boards. So really, children shouldn't be able to get their fingers into gaps or openings there. This is probably one of the major impacts of this whole standard and the presentation that we're doing today is involving this the spaces under, over, around the area. And here's one you can see, well, there's a handrail there, but we've got a giant opening where a child could easily fall through. An adult could go through there. So once again, handrails and guards, if it's over 30 inches, we need handrails. Handrails are things that will help us to go up and down. Generally, we're talking about stairways. Guards are things that they're barriers to keep us from falling off. Oh, I was going to talk about if you went back to that Olympic grandstand that we saw up at the Utah Olympic Park by the ski jumps. We had that grandstand, the ground fell away behind, and so you could fall over 100 feet, and I would dare say it was close to 200 feet when you put all of the slope into it. Um, I got a call one day from Fraser Bullock, the big boss, right? Mitt was involved, but Fraser did everything, right? He was the guy that really made things happen, the chief operational officer. And I get a call from Fraser, and he says, "Are you the guy that sent out this letter?" I said, "Yeah." And the letter that I had sent out said, "We've got some serious risk issues with the grandstands, and we need to fix those before we're able to put people in these things." And he says, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm at the Olympic Park." He says, "Good, stay there. I'll meet you at the grandstands in 5 minutes." And so we went up there, and he was pretty animated about this. And he says, "Show me what you're worried about." And we walked all the way to the top of the grandstands, and we had this guard rail along the back. So the top row of seating is there, and this is what you would lean up against at the very top. And I walked right up to the top, um, and and I reached out and I grabbed this guardrail and I lifted it up out of the sockets that it was in, and I turned around and I handed it to Fraser, and this opened up. There was no guardrail, and there was this 200-foot fall. I handed it to Fraser, and and he looked back at me. He says, "Oh, that's a problem. We need to fix that." And then we got along a lot better for the rest of the day. He didn't agree with everything that I'd given as a risk concern, but we fixed a lot of things, and we didn't have issues with our grandstands during the Olympics there. So think about this. What am I going to do to ensure that people are not going to fall off or through our bleachers? And so, um, in this case that you see here, we need to have what they call infill, something there to prevent people from getting through and also prevent people from climbing. If you look at the back of that backrest there, those are horizontal bars or slats. Well, I can easily climb up that, or I could place my bottom up on top of that to get a little bit better view. I can get a little higher, and I could easily just roll over the top. Well, these things need to be at least 42 inches in height. Now, there are some exceptions to that in some pre-existing things, but generally we're looking at 42 inches in height, and they need to prevent climbing. So have some sort of infill. Now that could be vertical. I'll show you a picture here. You can see how these slats are vertical. It doesn't give you a toe hold to be able to climb up that guard and be able to get up on top or fall over the side. Can I use chain link? And the answer is yes. So opening should be less than 1.75, 1 3/4 inches for vertical infill. If it's chain link, it needs to be 1 1/4 inches or smaller. Okay, we don't want to be able to get a toe into that chain link. And I know some people are accomplished chain link climbers out there, but in general, most people are not going to be able to get a toe hold to climb up. Chain link's not the most beautiful stuff, but it works to meet this requirement. Okay, so sometimes if we're doing retrofitting, chain link may be the appropriate material to put barriers on these sides, put guards there. Fire protection. I'm not going to go into detail on this at all because it doesn't apply to the majority of our bleachers and grandstands out there. If we are accommodating more than 15,000 people, then it is a requirement there. And once again, talk to your fire official on this. And I would look more indoor spaces where we have these grandstands would certainly fall into this more so than outdoor spaces. But you are required to have a public address system if you have oh, I lost the number. I believe it's greater than 300. I could be wrong on that. We have to have a public address system, and that's to kind of to accommodate people making an exit from the facility. All right. Head clearance is another thing to be concerned about. In general, you've got to have at least 80 inches of head clearance. I remember some bleachers as I was growing up in schools that would go right up into the rafters and you could hit your head on the ceiling there. Well, that would be inappropriate under the standard. If you're inside, then that clearance goes to 15 feet. And there's some specifics about the types of spaces inside. Once again, talk to your fire official about that. All right. Um, don't forget the manufacturer's guidance. You should have an owner's manual for that. You should have documentation from the purchase of those grandstands. If you don't, you should go out and find those. If the company is still in existence, they will send you an owner's manual. They will give you all the documentation because they don't want to get sued either. They want you to have all the information that you need to maintain your bleachers in a safe condition because they don't want to get sued either. All right. So make sure you have that. Maintain a file on each of those structures that you have out there. If they're old ones, we may have to get some engineering documents to really show us what we're looking at and that it's appropriate and meets the standard requirement. Okay. All right. Inspections. This is probably one of the major tenets or the major to-do items in this standard. What is that? It says, and I'm quoting in here, bleachers shall be inspected and evaluated at least once a year by a qualified person for compliance with the provisions of the standard. Wow. We need to document annual inspections of our bleachers and grandstands. And who needs to do that? A qualified person. Now that's language that we see in a lot of OSHA standards, particularly construction standards, but and we'll talk about what that is in just a second. Like we said, telescopic, each time you open and close it, it needs to be inspected by a competent person. So that means I got to have a competent person on staff because if we're going to be opening and closing those on a regular basis. All right. Um, and and we want to follow the manufacturer's requirements. If they say, here's what you need to inspect, that's what we need to inspect. And so I hesitate to send out just an inspection form because I want you to look at the manufacturer's documentation there because they may have some really specific things like torque specs. Bolts may need to be torqued to a certain standard for the manufacturer per the manufacturer's requirements. So know what those things are and document those. If you purchased a bleacher system in recent years, the manufacturer probably has an inspection form or document in their materials, so in the owner's manual. So document, document, document. If you don't, if it isn't documented, it never happened. Let's make sure that we've done this because if in the event that we have a major problem or a minor problem, this will be a key in you being able to defend yourself or the trust being able to defend you in a lawsuit or in a claim situation. All right. So who's a qualified person? The definition in the standard gives us is a professional trained in the proper and safe use, operation, and repair of bleachers and is knowledgeable in the requirements of this standard. Okay, so somebody, and probably somebody within your organization, needs to be trained up on this standard. Now, does this webinar make you a qualified person? I would say probably not. It gets you partway there, but it doesn't talk about the specifics of your bleacher system, your grandstands. And so there's going to be something with the manufacturer that your person, your qualified person, needs to be trained up on. And I'm happy to walk you through things, but once again, that manufacturer is really key in all of this. All right, here's some things to watch for. Slip and trip hazards, common things you can see in this picture. Here's an old grandstand structure, and it's really quite nice, even though it's older, except they haven't done a very good job of keeping their bolts tight. And so these bolts are terrible trip hazards. It would be really easy to catch your toe on that if you're walking on the seats, or it could be a laceration hazard that you sit on that or you walk into that. Let's look for those things. Look for hardware issues. If things are broken, if bolts are not tight, if we're not sitting level and flat on our base structures, all of those things. If our ballast isn't in place, and we'll talk about these other things in the upcoming slides. All right. Um, In the standard, it says an identification and inspection tag shall be installed in a visible location. I got pictures of bleacher seats here because in all the years I've done this, I've never found an inspection tag. And that makes me nervous because it's in the standard. Newer systems will have those in place, and that's probably the reason I may not have been on something that is brand new. But a lot of our older things, they're not going to exist, and we may have to come up with that or contact the manufacturer and get one of those. So it should say who the manufacturer is, when these were installed, what the total capacity, seating capacity is, who the inspector was when they put it in place, and the date that happened. So that's a pretty key thing to have in place. And if you go out and you're doing your inspection on your bleachers, please let me know if you find these things. I'd like to hear what the overall experience is. We need to inspect for damage. And that means we need to walk all of the bleachers. I can't sit on the other side of the rodeo arena and go, yeah, everything looks good over there on the other side. I've got to walk at least every other row to see where that damage may be. There may be something sharp. You can see in this picture where things are bent. There may be components missing. I may have openings where people could drop a foot through or a kid could slide through. I also want to inspect under the bleachers and see that those structural components are in good shape. When you get out there, shake it, jump on it. Don't jump on it too hard. We don't want you to go through. But let's look at these things under use and ensure that they're in good condition. Look for laceration hazards. Do you see a laceration hazard in this picture? Well, I see actually a couple of those. The one that I see is right in the foreground. You can see those two bolt heads, and then a gap in between those seats. Well, that edge along there was really sharp, and we had somebody stepping on that, and they slipped and really lacerated their leg on that sharp area. And it ended up being kind of a rough, difficult claim, but it's a laceration hazard, and it may not be really apparent. We look at that and go, that looks like it's maybe how it's put together. No, it really wasn't. Those needed to be installed tight, so there was not a gap between those. Look for sharp edges, bolts protruding, nails, anything like that, depending on its construction. Look for electrical issues as well. Talk to your code official on that. Follow the code. Sometimes, like this one picture I took, they wanted to put some lights out there, so they took an extension cord and zip tied it to the metal structure of the bleachers and then ran some lights around. Well, not only is this electrical equipment accessible to people sitting, this is the top level of those grandstands, but what happens if the insulation gets broken, and electrical circuits come in contact, or we have water, rain, something like that? The electrical current comes in contact with this metal structure. Well, we electrify the whole bleachers. That's a big problem there. So no electrical should be on bleachers and grandstands unless it's designed to have it that way. And we also want to look at our commentator stands, press boxes, and places like that to ensure that we have safe electrical systems there. If electrical's outdoor, it needs to be ground fault circuit interrupter equipped. All right. And apologize, guys, I've gone a little bit long here. The last slide, well, the second to last slide. Um, can your bleachers cut it? Are they adequate for the type of loads, the people that we're putting on these bleachers? Can they handle the activities that we're putting in there, the events? This is one of my favorite all-time pictures, just given the pictures of people's faces as they see this bull coming over the fence. If I have bleachers and grandstands that are set for they're designed for light duty stuff, and then I bring in rough stock at a rodeo, it may not work. We've had multiple situations around the country where rough stock have jumped the fence and ended up in the bleachers, and sometimes injured people from that. So let's make sure that our equipment is adequate and proper for the type of activities that we're putting there, and that it'll handle the loads that we're intending. All right, we've covered a lot of stuff, and I apologize. I went a little longer than I'd anticipated, but there's just a lot of stuff here. Just a few reminders on this. Make sure you know your standards. Talk to your code official about these things. Buy the right structures. Don't just go out and say, "Hey, this is what we're." Really do a review on this. Let's look at the codes. Let's look at how we're going to use it. Let's look at the weather that it's going to be exposed to, and let's put the right structure in place, and let's maintain it appropriately. Inspect it every year. Document those inspections, and then live long and prosper. All right, we covered a lot of stuff, folks. If you got questions or comments, please type those into the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer those now. Mike, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions right now, folks. If you got any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We'll get Jason to answer it for us. Great presentation, Jason. This is really good and really applicable this time of year when, just like you said at the outset, that we're getting ready now to host our summer events at our fair parks and things like that. So we need to get out there. We need to inspect these
Perfect time.
and document these bleachers. I mean, they're a big concern. We've got some bleachers out there, like you said, that are 100 years old, and we
Yeah.
need to make sure that they're ready to accept the throngs of guests that are going to be coming in the next couple months.
Absolutely, Mike. So let's get out there, take a look, do our inspections, document those things, and be ready to have a good time. All right.
Yeah.
Any questions come in?
Nope, we don't have anything in here.
All right. If you have questions, if you want to discuss this further, happy to talk about that, or Mike is as well. You can give us a call or send us an email, and we would be happy to discuss that with you. Okay. Thanks, folks, for your time and attention here today. Go out and have a safe day.